Hi, and welcome to AI Guardian's Responsible AI Leadership Series. Today, we are very fortunate to have Austin Mills with us. He is a partner at Morris Manning and Martin's corporate technology practice, and the chair of both the firm's artificial intelligence group and the blockchain and cryptocurrency group there. So it is probably fair to say he's on the cutting edge of a lot of legal issues right now. Pleasure to have you, Austin, on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I guess I'm finding out that I'm attracted to shiny things in technology, I guess. But yeah, no, this AI is certainly that, and happy to be here. So appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, and it's great to have. We've had folks from a lot of different disciplines. Great to have another from the legal side because there's a lot of fast-moving news and obviously developments in AI governance on this side. So really good to get your opinion on things. Okay, so let's just get started with the basic of that. So on your side, as a legal expert, kind of where are you seeing companies excel or struggle as they integrate generative AI into their operations right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the major themes on perhaps the struggle side is first and foremost just fear of the unknown, right? And there's been sort of a shift there too, right? So I'd say around GPT 3.5 release by OpenAI roughly a year or so ago was kind of when this recent wave of attention and activity sort of picked up. And early on, conversations with clients was very much just like again, fear of the unknown. Like, what is this thing? We see all these hallucinations. Like, yes, we can see how this is going to be impactful and all that. But what are we, it's new. And that can be scary. On the success side, the early success and what we've seen where people start to get comfortable with that fear is more on the internal use, right, as opposed to sort of more of an external facing product or service, using it in certain parts for internal use. So some of the low hanging fruit there were use in connection with the creation of marketing materials or other content, right, where it's like, okay, we have this tool, we can do this faster, we can create more, we can refine it more, we can modify it to different forms more, but the end product and what we're using it with is not particularly risky or mission critical, and there's a human oversight before it goes out the door. And then I think the next big wave where a lot of our clients have been using it and really value its benefits has been in the software coding tools, right? Whether it's GitHub Copilot or Tab9 or any of the other major ones. And I mean, those have their own particular legal issues and risks we could get into. And there's a lot you have to look out there for, but, overall, those have been, I think, very useful to clients, even, and you generally use them in ways that mitigate those risks. So I mean, those, I think we're starting to hit the next wave of, the product. I mean, we're obviously seeing it in the market, and we have several clients that have taken, have integrated LLMs and other, new AI products into their product stack and included them in their software. And, that functionality is available as a broader set, as part of the broader set of the whole page. But I think that's where we're really going to start seeing things really start to move here for the next 12, 18 months.
Honestly, on our side, we've seen both fear of missing out and fear of the unknown all at once. It probably depends on the role of the company. But right. I'm curious on your side on when you're dealing with legal issues and kind of helping companies at this stage, what type of role at the company is really leading that right now? Because we've seen it a little bit all over the place. So I'm kind of curious how you see it from your side.
Like who in the company is being tasked with responsibility for? Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of the organization. And I mean, it's almost always, at least with our clients, in the C-suite, right? First and foremost, and very heavily, and then some of the ones that are more advanced have formed committees or working groups or whatever they might call them, of broader stakeholders within the organization, but almost always with either CEO or COO and almost always CTO or some equivalent involvement. That's and our clients are heavily technology clients, and obviously this and software-based technology clients. So there's no lack of appreciation of the gravity of this at multiple levels. So I think that's why we're seeing it be a top-down sort of initiative.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. And I'm curious from legal perspective, are there any areas that are particular blind spots that you're having to help a lot of clients on at this stage as they think through the legal issues around AI?
Yeah, I think there's a few major buckets, and I wouldn't, a lot of these are not blind spots for a lot of our clients. Some of them are blind spots for just some of them, but they're important, and these are a lot of the conversations we're most actively having. So, IP ownership implications, right? What are your ownership and other rights to AI generated output? And there's we could get into all the copyright implications and all that, but as a quick note, right? If purely generated AI output at this moment in the United States, generally it does not have copyright protection. So if you use AI, create that output, you buy it valuable, you put it out into the world. Someone takes it and uses it, at least from an IP perspective, there's probably nothing you can do about that, where traditionally you would have mostly copyright infringement claims.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, and that particularly when it comes to the software programming tools, right? Like if you were relying solely on AI generated output for, a material part of your software, and then that code made it to the world and someone used it, you might have a trade secret claim or something like that, but you probably have a challenge on a copyright claim, which is normally how you deal with those issues. So that's one. Again, that's only a blind spot for some. That's one of the major issues. Something that's less sort of thought about is what are the implications of your planned use in connection with your existing contracts, both on the customer side and on your vendors, right? So on the customer side, okay, a lot of our clients, oh, look, these AI tools, they enable us to really do new sort of data analysis that we hadn't previously been able to do, and we really value that. It's like, well, the data they often want to analyze is coming from their customers or other third parties under contract, and oftentimes those contracts would restrict them from using it for that use case. So are you able to do what you want to do under those contracts? And on the vendor side, should you be concerned with your vendors using AI? I mean, as a law firm, a couple of our larger clients have sent us letters that, hey, just to remind you, like, you have to get use of new technology approved by us before you use it, and we do not approve of you using generative AI in connection with the work you do for us. And the same data issues, right? Like all of a sudden the vendors have the same thought as you do, right? Like, oh, I got all this data, I've got these AI tools, like, what can I do with it? Looking at those, are you worried about, you were feeding them customer data to serve your customers as your vendor for your benefit. Does your contract also let them do that? And is that now a problem? Right. Say another one is the data privacy regulation implications, right? We'll probably get into the regulatory environment a little bit here. As far as sort of the legacy regulatory environment that applies here, a lot of the data privacy laws overlap. That's, we have a dedicated group for that. That's not my specialty, but with things like data brokerage laws, biometrics, anytime those sort of become a part of your use of AI, they could also implicate data privacy regulations that you previously were not having to worry about or, even be aware of. And then, kind of related to the vendor issue, the commercial implications of being dependent on a third-party LLM provider, right? If you want to integrate, I mean, most of these LLMs are the product of hundreds of millions of dollars of training and all that. It's not the kind of, they're not the base models are not the kind of thing that every early stage tech company can just go create their own. So you're relying on these third-party models. Most of the contracts, even if you get an enterprise contract with OpenAI, it's generally going to give them lots of flexibility in getting out of that, right? If they're uncomfortable with the regulatory environment or your use, or the terms are generally short. So if you are building your whole product stack around this third-party tool, and all of a sudden they pull it from you, are you ready for that? So those might be the bigger areas where there are some potential blind spots.
That is a lot of blind spots. Those are some good areas. So I'm actually curious to follow up on a couple of those. The last one you mentioned was kind of the public LLMs, your chat GPTs, et cetera. A lot of them have been issuing indemnification kind of policies. Do you see value in that? How do you see that as a help for companies that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's mostly on the IP infringement front,
Yeah.
because that's such a big issue, both on, the data input side, right? There's lots of mass litigation going on where major sources of data that know that these LLMs were trained on their data are now suing, suggesting they couldn't. I mean, it's interesting for me because this has been a hot area in technology litigation and debate on the screen scraping side for like the last decade, and that's still not overly well settled on, what are third-party rights to public data. Like, can you just take all the data off LinkedIn and use it for your own training benefit or background use, or does LinkedIn are they able to protect that? And those sort of different courts are giving different answers, and the regulatory framework doesn't always give good answers. So I think, dealing with the same thing here. So that's
Well, so you're saying there's confusion over what fair use means, and that might lead to legal issues.
Well, yeah, and as a copyright lawyer, I'm still confused. I mean, we only find out what fair use means when the Supreme Court decides, every 10 years when some question. But yes, that's right. And so, but yeah, no. So back to your question, I think that was just a commercial response, right? You want to sell enterprise licenses, like, I mean, it's the same thing. I'd say the same thing with the software coding tools. Have had this progression where some of the first, when they were first released, the terms of service behind them gave more rights to the provider to use the data to train, to hold on to that data. They quickly realized that you can get individuals working on open source projects to agree to that kind of stuff. But if you want a large, corporation to pay you, millions of dollars a year to use your tool across their developers, they're not gonna agree to that. So we've seen a shift, and I think it's market driven to, identifying for IP infringement, right? But I think we first maybe saw it out of Adobe. And I think the whole idea is, okay, you can go get your image generator here, get your image generator there. But if you get sued for the output infringing some artist's materials, they're not going to protect you, but we will. Yeah. And I think that, and Adobe's customers value that. So that's why it's been happening.
Yeah. And I'm curious on your side with the IP piece that you brought up early on. Obviously this is a gray area right now on IP rights. But because it's just going to take years for settled case law to come through and kind of put it all in writing. But are there certain things you're telling clients now that they should be doing as best practices in those areas of IP to protect themselves, even though there's not case law settled yet on this?
Yeah, well, one thing you can do, and I mean, I'll couch this for a specific example. So just take just to make it simple, you want to create a one-page marketing brochure about some product, and you tell ChatGPT, like, here are the core themes that I want to make come clear. Here's the functionality of the product that I want to be described. Please create me a marketing materials with this tone, and and then you could probably come behind that and like have DALL-E 3 create me an image that goes along with this, right? So just that raw output would not be copyrightable, not be protectable. But if you were to go in and a sufficient line has not been drawn here, and probably never will, but once a sufficient amount of human involvement has come in behind and made modifications and all that, all of a sudden it goes from not copyrightable to copyrightable, not just the part they changed, but the thing as a whole. So, that's one way to increase that probability. I mean, on the software programming front, again, it's a little bit tougher, but again, ideally active involvement and manipulation by the developer, right? They're not just relying wholly on the tool for hundreds of thousands of lines of code, things like that. So, I mean, there are steps you can take to improve the likelihood of a good outcome. And back to the example, like that image would not be copyrightable. I mean, the question is, do you care if someone steals it? But and if you don't, then don't worry about it too much. But yeah.
Well, and I think the hard part is when that image becomes something like your company logo, and then your company takes off, and then how do you protect your own company IP? Right.
That's true. Yeah. At least in that scenario, you'd have trademark protection if you could get it. which wouldn't look at these same questions of AI generated content. It's just more okay, do you fall within those bounds? But yeah,
that's fair.
right.
So yeah, it's just interesting for us because we have a lot of partners we work with who kind of get the gist of what you say, but are like, well, how do I safeguard in the interim period? And I think that's the hardest part for most of the folks right now in the C-suite.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe this is, weird thing for a IP heavy attorney to say, but not every, I've used AI to generate output. And I mean, I think in one of my recent client alerts, I even, a little bit of a snarky blurb at the end, like PS this, and it was, specifically his IP rights to AI generated content was the subject of the article. It's like PS the image in this. I basically copied this article into ChatGPT, asked me to make an image that goes along with it. This is what it gave me. Here it is. It's not copyrightable. Steal it if you want. Right. So I mean, everyone's so obsessed with IP protection, but like not everything has to be protected either. Now that's of course not true with like things like source code and the like, but sometimes people can be overly sensitive to those issues too.
That is absolutely fair. So I'm changing gears just a little bit here. I'm curious. We've obviously last few weeks had a lot of news on the regulatory front from the White House, OMB office. You had the big confab in the UK. Just generally, I'm kind of curious as a firm and as a leader at that firm, how do you view the regulatory path ahead right now for AI governance and compliance?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be the craziest sort of wave of regulation that I've ever seen in my career paying attention to stuff. I mean, it's just there's at every level, and I mean, appropriate in that AI is going to touch like every aspect of our lives. Society, business, government. Like it's all there's it's just such general purpose application that it's understandable that everyone wants to think and talk about it, and then regulators want to regulate it. So as someone that has a job to do every day, it's there's so much noise that and there's so much I'm not a lobbyist, so I don't have to know what everyone wants wants it to be or whatever. I need to know what it actually is when it's published, and we're still early in that. So but yeah, no, I mean, there's so much going on. It's impossible to keep up with all of it. I mean, I do think, the stuff you mentioned, right? They were the inevitable and appropriate first steps, right? The White House executive order, the OMB guidelines. It's an acknowledgement of most of the major, potential issues this new technology presents, right? So I mean, from the White House's executive order, that's everything from safety and soundness of the AI, its implication on the fairness and bias issues. You've got a desire to remain competitive, right? I mean, there's an appreciation that those that excel at artificial intelligence and their use are going to be more competitive than those that don't in many ways. And if you just always operate out of fear and let's ban this until we're comfortable, then you have different problems, right? You'd have different issues. So, and walking that line is probably an impossible task, right? I mean, it's just the trade-offs will always be there. Is the other thing, protecting privacy and civil liberties, managing risk of the government's own use. Those are all themes that make sense. Now the question is, how will they get implemented? What unintended consequences of their implementation will be? What trade-offs will there be? How will these things be used for regulatory capture in a way that is meant to benefit the large stakeholders over the market and public in general, which is always a risk when it comes to these sorts of things. So I think it's a good first step.
Yeah.
I have my personal skepticism of how this is hard, right? I mean, this is, and I think that take the EU, for example, I think they will likely lead. They will roll out, as far as large nation states or large, developed, and they'll probably go too far. They'll probably do things that have worse trade-offs than the things they're protecting against. But, and, in other ways, I mean, kind of going all over the board here too. I think one big theme of a lot of the regulation in legislation is that it seems disproportionately focused on the kinds of things politicians care about. I'm trying to be
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
they care about manipulation of elections, and not that that doesn't matter, but I'm more worried about, you know, the person in his basement that can, you know, use GPT-7 when it rolls out in 4 years to, you know, basically design and create a superus or whatever, right? I mean, it's like, you know, in theory, this is a tool. You know, nuclear weapons require massive infrastructure costs, and you know, they're not. No one can do it in their basement, right? We're creating a powerful tool without meaningful barriers to entry. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of focus on fairness and bias, and not that it doesn't matter, but I think it's also just incredibly hard problem to solve, and I think a lot of those things are subjective, right? It's one person's objective fact is another person's bias, and vice versa. And I think that also is what makes it such an easy political issue, right?
Yeah.
To like let each party have their line on and speak to their, but you know, is that where the focus should be? Is that where the biggest risks are? I don't think so. But I mean, this is just the reality of the global political and governance environment that we live in. So anyway, I mean, regulators are doing, I mean, it's just all this criticism, I should, you know, to the extent that I'm criticizing the various stakeholders here, I also want to acknowledge, like, this is an impossible task, right? Like, you can't walk, there is no perfect line to walk that both maximizes the good and, you know, minimizes the bad, right? There's going to be trade-offs, and those trade-offs are going to be rooted in subjective differences between what different stakeholders and portions of society think is what's more important, relevant to other person. Like some will bias and fairness is so important that we need to sacrifice all these other sort of net gains to make sure that that's addressed first. And others will be like, no, like you have to let some of that happen, because net we're better off pushing forward, even if it's kind of messy.
Yeah,
So,
and that's the hard part. I mean, technology is moving so fast now; it moves faster than how governments can process things.
yeah, and
you
it's just
kinda-
accelerating, right? And
Yeah.
and our systems are not. In fact, our systems are probably just getting more cumbersome and bogged down and slower. And I mean, it's such a polarized political environment. I mean, that's another part of the problem is by the time they figure out some alignment, we're going to be on we're going to be 3 generations of the tech forward, and like have all kinds of weird new things to deal with that didn't even anticipate.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because I'm old enough to remember previous tech waves, and I always say tech waves attack the weakest parts of the regulatory or legal environment, and it's like, you know, it's the same thing that happened with the internet and years of Amazon not collecting taxes, because why? We have a patchwork sales tax environment in the US, and so it was impossible to collect taxes at that level. Same with mobile. You know, the idea that suddenly everyone in the world had a phone in with a camera in their pocket, and what are the legal implications of recording and video taping on the fly? And I think you're going to have the same things here. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how, the EU probably leads with the EU AI Act, how the US responds, how states like California respond, because they already feel like they've got power with their privacy laws to extend into this space. But it's going to get real interesting. I'm curious on your side. People always get in trouble playing Nostradamus, but do you have a perspective on timeline? Like, when do you think things are going to start to really hit where you have to prepare clients not only for good governance now, but start to think about compliance with things as they come down the pike?
Yeah, I mean, in part, there are some that already have to be navigated, right? I mean, I would think the New York AEDT law, which basically regulates use of AI and similar technologies in the hiring and promotion practices. And so we have several clients, for example, that are in that space that have software tools that are for companies to use to help sort through candidates in an automated fashion, narrow it down to these 10% to be interviewed, right? So now those things are expressly regulated in New York. They have to, they've had to go find auditors to audit their bias. They've had to register. They've had to do these things. So there's already small pieces. And to your question, we'll continue to, especially at the state and local level, we'll see things incrementally every month, and then every day at some point. and you'll have to navigate those right away. As far as the bigger stuff, the national, federal, I mean, for start, I represent mostly sort of earlier stage middle market technologies, less of the mega tech, the Googles of the world. I mean, if you're Google, if you're OpenAI,
Mhm.
for better or worse, your job is to go lobby for your interests, and
Yeah.
they do. Yeah. If you're an early stage tech company, that's a waste of your time and resources. I wouldn't say just wait until the laws come out and react to them. You want to know directionally where things are headed, because especially how it might affect your product development roadmap, right? If, for example, if you were one of those hiring tools and you knew that New York was working on this bill and that was a heavy market for you, you'd already want to be thinking about how can I, what do I need to do to be ready for that launch? I mean, the nice thing is most regulation, especially anything that requires significant time and investment, gives you a good amount of lead time to become compliant. And I don't remember what the lead time on AADT law was, but I think it was probably a year or more before being enacted when companies actually having to be in compliance with it. So yeah, I mean, for most companies, it's just wait and see. And then when that rule hits, react. But they're probably not well served to try to be too proactive and guessing what's coming in the pipeline, at least right now. So
yeah, that makes sense. It's gonna be interesting. I think you'll probably see some things start to hit in Q1, but they'll have those moratorium periods. Like you mentioned, it's a matter of how quickly do you have to start to get in line during that moratorium period once the law's established. Okay. Hey, so just a couple more questions for you. So underpinning a lot of at least the US effort on regulatory is the NIST AI risk management framework. Obviously, this has been important for the government and their agencies as they look at regulation, but curious what your view of those standards are, and should clients be thinking about those standards as they enact their own responsible AI? Kind of want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I have not read the full NIST standards, but yeah, I what I have read, I like. I mean, and NIST as an organization, I think it generally produces more quality standards and outputs than most others, and provides a good framework. And as far as what's out there at the moment, I would put that more sort of as the top of, if you're looking for guiding principles, frameworks, things like that. Particularly the US, NIST as a model, is about as good as anything you could look toward right now. And yes, it almost certainly will be heavily factored into the way the legislatures and regulators, implement their initiatives as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and certainly more sense than most alternatives.
Mm-hmm. And do you guys, when you think about responsible AI and just advising your clients on other like just best practices, do you guys look to anything besides NIST? Are there certain things you point clients to and say, hey, I'd really look at these frameworks as you guys start to integrate AI on your own?
No sort of specific external frameworks or outside of NIST at the moment in any sort of meaningful way. But relatedly, I mean, we encourage clients to, look at their use cases on a case-by-case basis and consider things like, internal AI usage policies, right? Like, okay, here's what we're doing. Here are the various things we need to think about, right? Responsible use, compliance with laws, respect for privacy and data security, fairness and inclusivity, IP rights, transparency and accountability, right? And just sort of looking at it, okay, there's that, going back to the old example, there's that marketing brochure, right? Maybe not a whole lot of risk management needs to go into that. And then there's I want to let ChatGPT or GPT-4 be the back end of my chat bot now for my my mobile banking app that allow and give it power to transfer money when the customer tells it to, right? Like, maybe don't do that yet. But and then there's a whole spectrum in between, and yeah, I mean, it's the risk reward, right? And it's the the whole, yeah, you can avoid all risk, but then you probably got a useless product on the back end of this, and the market's left you behind. So yeah, I mean, as far as risk management, yeah, this framework, um, obviously whatever legislation's already out there, and potentially whatever legislation is, seems to be very clearly marching towards implementation in the short term. But it's hard to say there's a one size fits all, and our clients have very different sort of risk frameworks than the Googles, the Apples of the world, in multiple directions. So yeah, kind of a case by case basis for the most part.
That is fair. And so last question on this one is just talks to generalities and kind of what folks can be doing now. So obviously you have a lot of clients coming to you, trying to get in position, right? The right position on these subjects. When you talk AI implementation, responsible AI, what are the things and you might have mentioned some of these with the committees, the policies, et cetera, but what are some of the things that you say, hey, you guys, if there's 5 things or 3 things you have to do now, what are the things you usually are telling your clients right now that they should be doing on this side?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say take inventory, analyze what are your desired potential use cases, right? What do you theoretically want to do with this? I mean, and part of that, well, maybe before that is, as you will, engaging the appropriate stakeholders. So C-suite participation is, but I mean, it just for the same reason, right? Like the government, you mentioned the OMB AI guidelines. What's interesting, some part about that is it almost mirrors the way I encourage a lot of our clients to think about their own internal use, right? AI governance, managing risks from the use of AI, right? It's that's acknowledgement at the federal level that AI has implications across every agency, every part of the organization. So it's not just that we need an AI agency. We need every agency to be thinking about AI. I think the same thing with the companies, right? It's, you will want a diverse set of stakeholders across the organization, across, marketing, development, compliance, all of that. You want all of them involved because it's going to be potentially relevant to all of them. Yeah. And then, those are the same ones that will, presumably have the ideas about how AI can be leveraged, and then look at how you might want to leverage AI, and then assess the risk implications for each use case. And normally, once you're doing anything interesting at all, an AI usage policy likely makes sense at that point. At least having some guiding principles for the organization of the protocols, the procedures, how you guys think about it. Maybe you want to enact approval rights for any use cases or any new tools. So, or maybe your software programmers, okay, we've diligenced GitHub Copilot and Tab9. We're comfortable that they're doing this in a way that we can use it. So you can use those. If you want to use another tool, it has to be approved by the committee or something like that. So those are sort of the major first steps, I would say, for organizations as they think about managing this going forward.
No, very, very helpful. And I think that I asked that question at the end just because I think it's the number one thing that stymies most folks we talk with, right? How do I get started on this journey? So really appreciate the perspective there. And Austin, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I enjoyed it. I appreciate it.